The pink sky of Colony Sila 3 turned black as the Dreknid warships blocked out the sunlight. 8-year-old Lyra clutched her favorite data pad to her chest, her 4 eyes wide with fear as she watched the massive ships descend through her classroom window. The emergency sirens began to wail across the peaceful colony. "Everyone to the shelter," her teacher shouted, her silver skin shifting to a pale gray color of distress. "Quickly, children." Lyra ran with her classmates toward the underground shelter. The ground shook as the first bombs hit the colony's outer defense shields. She could hear the adults talking in scared voices about how the Dreknids had broken through their early warning systems. But they never made it to the shelter. A Dreknid drop pod crashed through the school's roof, landing right in their path. The massive insectoid warriors burst out, their black armor gleaming and their mandibles clicking with hunger. Lyra's teacher pushed the children behind her, but the Dreknids showed no mercy. They fired their weapons, and her teacher fell. In the chaos, Lyra got separated from the group. She ran down a different hallway, her hearts pounding so hard she thought they would burst. She could hear screaming everywhere. Her people weren't warriors. The Silurians were scholars and artists. They had no defense against the brutal Dreknids. She found herself in the school's storage room, hiding behind boxes of teaching supplies. Through a small window, she could see the colony burning. The beautiful crystal buildings were falling one by one. Tears ran down her face as she tried to make herself as small as possible. The door burst open. Lyra held her breath, expecting to see the terrifying shape of a Dreknid warrior. Instead, she saw something she had only read about in her studies. A human. He was wearing dark combat armor with strange markings, and he held a big gun in his hands. His face had a long scar running down one cheek, and on his shoulder was a patch showing Earth's symbol. The human's eyes met hers. Unlike the Dreknids, his eyes looked kind, even though his face was covered in dirt and what looked like blood. "It's okay," he said in simple galactic standard. "I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" Lyra shook her head, still trembling. "My name is..." But an explosion drowned out his words. "We need to move. Now." More explosions rocked the building. The human soldier moved quickly, scooping Lyra up in one arm while holding his weapon with the other. She noticed how carefully he held her, making sure not to squeeze too tight with his much stronger human muscles. They ran through the burning hallways. Twice they had to stop as the human fired his weapon at Dreknid warriors, his shots precise and powerful. Lyra had never seen anyone stand up to the Dreknids before, but this human fought them without fear. "The evacuation ships are this way," he said, running toward the school's sports field, where several human dropships had landed. Other human soldiers were helping groups of Silurians board the ships. Just then, a massive explosion knocked them both down. Lyra rolled away from the human soldier. Her ears were ringing, and smoke filled the air. She felt someone grab her. Another human soldier. "Got one!" The new soldier yelled, pulling her toward the nearest ship. "Wait," Lyra called out, trying to look back for the soldier who had saved her. But the smoke was too thick, and everything was chaos. The last thing she saw was his scared face appearing briefly through the smoke before disappearing again. The ship took off, carrying Lyra and other survivors to safety. As they broke through the atmosphere, she pressed her face against the window, watching her home burn below. She clutched her data pad tighter, realizing she never learned the name of the human who had risked his life to save her. That day, Lyra lost her home, but she gained something else. A burning desire to understand the species that could be both fierce warriors and gentle protectors. Somewhere out there was a human with a scared face who had shown her that even in the darkest moments, there was still hope. 10 years had passed since the raid on Colony Sila 3. Lyra stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her formal research robes. Her silver skin had deepened to the adult shade of pearl white, and all 4 of her eyes now held the wisdom of a scholar. On her desk sat her prized possession, the same data pad she had clutched during the evacuation, now filled with her research on humans. Dr. Lyra, her computer chimed. Your transport to Earth leaves in 1 hour. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her excited hearts. After years of study and hard work, she had finally earned her chance to visit humanity's homeworld. Many of her fellow Solarians thought she was strange for dedicating her life to studying humans. They called humans dangerous and unpredictable. But Lyra knew better. She remembered the gentle way the human soldier had carried her through the burning school. The space terminal was crowded with beings from across the galaxy. Lyra noticed how other aliens moved away when humans walked past, but she watched them with fascination. A human child was helping an elderly Zentarian with their bags. A human security guard was carefully explaining directions to a lost Meplon family. These simple acts of kindness reminded her that humans were more than just the warriors everyone feared. On the transport ship, Lyra reviewed her research notes. She had become one of the youngest xenoanthropologists in the Galactic Academy, specializing in human culture and military history. Her latest paper, Understanding Human Compassion in Combat Situations, had earned her this research grant to study on Earth. First time visiting Earth? Asked a human woman sitting next to her. The woman had gray hair and kind eyes. Yes, Lyra answered in careful standard English. I'm a researcher studying human culture. Interesting choice, the woman smiled. Most aliens prefer to study us from a safe distance. A human saved my life during the Dreknid War, Lyra explained. I've wanted to understand your species ever since. The woman's face grew serious. The Dreknid War was terrible. My daughter served in it. She said the hardest part wasn't fighting the Dreknids. It was seeing what they did to peaceful colonies like yours. Lyra nodded, remembering the destruction of her home. But what amazed me was how many human soldiers helped us, even when it wasn't their mission. My rescuer could have been punished for stopping to save me. That's just who we are, the woman said simply. We can't walk away when someone needs help, even if it means breaking the rules. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, and Lyra got her first view of the planet that had produced her savior. It was beautiful but scary. Heavy clouds, vast oceans, and tall mountains. No wonder humans were so strong. They evolved on this challenging world. Her temporary home would be in New Singapore, a huge city where modern buildings touched the clouds. The university had given her an apartment near the military archives where she would do her research. As she unpacked her things, Lyra looked out her window at the busy streets below. Somewhere on this planet was the scared-faced soldier who had saved her. She didn't expect to find him. Earth was home to billions of humans, but being here made her feel closer to solving the mystery. That night, Lyra added to her personal journal. Humans are not what most aliens think. Yes, they are strong and sometimes violent, but that's because their harsh world taught them to survive. What makes them special is how they use that strength to protect others. They're not just warriors, they're guardians. And somewhere out there is the guardian who showed me this truth when I was just a scared child. Maybe one day I'll be able to thank him. She looked at her old datapad and smiled. Her journey to understand humanity was just beginning. The military archives in New Singapore were huge. Lyra sat at a research station, surrounded by holographic displays showing battle records from the Dreknid War. She had been here for 2 weeks, reading everything she could find about the rescue mission on Colony Sila 3. Would you like more coffee, Dr. Lyra? Asked Mr. Wong, the elderly human archivist who had been helping her. He had quickly gotten used to how Silurians could drink coffee, even though most aliens found it too strong. Yes, please, she said, taking the cup carefully in her slender fingers. I think I found something interesting about that day. Mr. Wong pulled up a chair. He had become fascinated by Lyra's research, especially since he had worked in the archives during the war. Look at this, Lyra pointed to a report. The original mission orders were just to hold back the Dreknids, while the colony's own ships evacuated people. But these combat logs show that 23 human soldiers broke formation to actively rescue civilians. Ah yes, Mr. Wong nodded. That caused quite a problem with the commanders. Lyra scrolled through more records. They faced court-martial for disobeying orders. They did, but public opinion supported them. Humans back home couldn't accept leaving civilians to die, even if it was strategically correct. Mr. Wong sipped his own coffee. All charges were eventually dropped. Lyra found another document that made all four of her eyes widen. It says here that the human soldiers who went back for civilians had an 82% success rate in their rescues, while suffering only minimal casualties. How is that possible? The Drecknids were everywhere. Mr. Wong smiled. That's something many aliens don't understand about us. When humans are protecting others, we fight differently. More focused, more determined. The soldiers weren't just thinking about the mission anymore. They were thinking about each person they could save. A new hologram showed footage from that day. Lyra watched as human soldiers carried children, helped the elderly, and fought off Drecknids while protecting civilians. Her heart beat faster as she searched each frame, hoping to spot the scared face she remembered. The interesting thing, Mr. Wong continued, is that this changed how the military wrote their rescue protocols. They realized that letting soldiers follow their protective instincts often led to better results than strict tactical planning. Lyra made notes on her datapad. So the military learned from the soldiers' compassion. Exactly. Now all Earth Defense Force units are trained to balance mission objectives with civilian protection. We call it the Sci-Fi protocol, actually. This surprised Lyra. She had no idea her colony's tragedy had led to such an important change in human military thinking. She found herself feeling proud, even though she had been just one of the many children rescued that day. As the afternoon went on, Lyra discovered more surprising facts. The human soldiers had not only saved people, they had also rescued important cultural artifacts from the colony's museums. They had helped carry medical supplies and personal treasures. One soldier had even gone back to save a classroom's pet animals. Humans are incredible, Lyra said softly. Other species think you're just strong because you come from a high-gravity world with dangerous predators. But your real strength is in your hearts. Mr. Wong patted her shoulder gently. That's why your research is important, Dr. Lyra. You're helping others understand us better. As the archive's closing time approached, Lyra downloaded one last set of files to study at home. She had learned so much, but she still hadn't found any clear pictures of her rescuer. Still, she felt closer to understanding why he had risked his career to save her. That night, she added to her research notes, human strength comes in many forms. Yes, they can lift heavy weights and survive harsh conditions, but their greatest strength is their ability to care deeply about others, even strangers from other worlds. This is what makes them unique in the galaxy, not their physical power, but their power to feel and act with compassion. The Old Soldiers' Bar in Toronto was different from any place Lyra had visited on Earth. The sign outside was worn, and above the door hung both the Earth Defense Force flag and the flags of various alien allies. Mr. Wong had suggested she come here, saying that many veterans from the Drecknid War gathered in this place. Lyra pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the lighting was dim, and the walls were covered with photos and military patches. She noticed that her silver skin seemed to glow softly in the bar's warm light. A few heads turned to look at her, mostly humans, but also some alien veterans from allied species. Behind the bar stood a tall human woman with short gray hair and a cybernetic arm, clearly a war veteran herself. The bartender's eyes widened slightly when she saw Lyra. "Well, don't see many Silurians in here," the bartender said kindly. "I'm Sarah. What brings you to our little corner of Earth?" "I'm Dr. Lyra. I'm researching human military history, especially the rescue operations during the Drecknid War." She placed her data pad on the bar. "Mr. Wong from the archives suggested I might find veterans here who were willing to share their stories." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Wong's a good man. You're welcome here, Doctor. First drinks on the house. We still remember what happened at Sci-Fi. An older human man sitting nearby turned at the mention of Sci-Fi. His face had burned scars on one side. "You're from Sila 3?" he asked. "Yes, I was there during the raid," Lyra answered. "I was one of the children who was rescued." The man introduced himself as Captain Rodriguez, retired. "I commanded one of the evacuation ships that day," he said. "Never seen anything like it. My soldiers breaking ranks left and right to save civilians. Should have been chaos. Instead, it was." He paused, searching for words. "It was humanity at its finest," Sarah finished, placing drinks in front of them both. More veterans joined their conversation. Each had a different story from the war. One soldier had lost his leg saving the Zentarian family. Another had nightmares about the Drecknids for years, but still said she would do it all again to save innocent lives. "The thing about humans," an older veteran named Chen explained, "is that we don't handle trauma like other species. We don't try to forget. We take the pain and turn it into something useful." Lyra took notes as they talked. "How do you mean?" she asked. "After Sila 3, a lot of us veterans became teachers, doctors, builders," Chen said. "We helped set up new colonies, improved defense systems, trained the next generation. The war changed us, but we chose how it changed us." Sarah pointed to a wall covered in children's drawings. "Those are from kids we helped evacuate from various colonies. They send them to thank us. Some are grown up now, like you. That's what helps us heal, knowing we made a difference." Lyra looked at the drawings with new understanding. In Silurian culture, they tried to move past trauma by rarely speaking of it. But humans faced it directly, using their experiences to help others. "The soldier who saved me," Lyra said quietly. "He had a long scar on his face. I've been trying to find him, to thank him." The veterans exchanged looks. "A lot of us got scars in that war," Sarah said gently. "But keep looking. Having someone come back to say thank you, it means more than you know." As the evening went on, Lyra learned more about human veterans than any archive could teach her. They laughed together, remembered fallen friends, and shared stories both sad and hopeful. She understood now that human strength wasn't just about surviving trauma. It was about growing from it. Before she left, Sarah gave her a patch from the bar. "You're part of this story too," she said. "Sometimes the ones who were saved help us remember why we fought in the first place." Lyra held the patch carefully, feeling closer than ever to understanding both her mysterious rescuer and the remarkable species that had produced him. The memorial ceremony was being held in Central Park, New York. Thousands of people had gathered to remember those lost in the Drecknid War. Lyra stood among the crowd, her research robes replaced by formal Silurian mourning clothes that shimmered softly in the afternoon sun. Sarah from the Veterans Bar had told her about this ceremony. "If you want to find someone who fought at Sila 3, she had said, this is where they'll be. They all come to remember." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Names of the fallen were projected into the sky, both human and alien. Children from different species placed flowers at the base of a giant memorial statue. The statue showed a human soldier helping an alien child to safety, and Lyra's heart beat faster when she saw it. It reminded her so much of her own rescue. "Today we remember not just those we lost," the speaker was saying, "but also the bonds formed between species in our darkest hours." Lyra watched as various veterans took their places near the memorial. Many wore their old uniforms, now decorated with peaceful medals instead of combat gear. She scanned their faces, looking for the scar she remembered so clearly. Then she saw him. He was standing at the edge of the gathering, wearing a simple Earth Defense Force instructor's uniform. The scar on his face had faded somewhat with time, but it was still there, running down his right cheek just as she remembered. He was older now, his black hair starting to show gray at the temples, but his stance was still strong and alert. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. After 10 years of searching, could it really be him? She started moving through the crowd, trying to get closer. But just then, a group of Zentarian dignitaries moved between them, their large forms blocking her view. By the time she managed to get around them, the man was gone. "Excuse me," she asked a nearby human officer. The instructor who was standing there. "Who is he?" "Oh, that's Lieutenant Chen. Marcus Chen. He teaches combat ethics at the academy now." The officer looked curious. "Did you know him from the war?" Lyra's hearts were racing. Marcus Chen. Finally, she had a name. "Which academy?" she asked quickly. "The Earth Defense Force Academy, about 2 miles from here. He runs the Humanitarian Operations Program." The officer smiled. "Interesting guy. He helped write the Sci-Fi protocol for civilian protection during combat operations." Everything was connecting. The soldier who had risked his career to save her had gone on to teach others to do the same. He had turned that one act of compassion into a whole new way of thinking about military operations. Lyra wanted to run to the academy right away, but she knew she had to be patient. This ceremony was important. It was about remembering and honoring sacrifices. She stayed until the end, watching as the last rays of sunlight caught the names still floating in the sky. After the ceremony, she walked through the park, her mind full of questions. Would he remember her? Should she tell him how his actions had changed her life? What if she was wrong, and it wasn't really him? She took out her data pad and looked at her research notes. All these years studying humans, trying to understand their unique mix of strength and compassion, and now she might finally meet the one who had first shown her these qualities. That evening, she sent a message to the academy requesting permission to give a guest lecture about Silurian-human relations. It was a legitimate request. She was a qualified xenoanthropologist after all. But her real hope was that it would give her a chance to meet Marcus Chen properly, in a setting where they could talk. As she waited for a reply, Lyra thought about how humans always said there were no coincidences. If that was true, then maybe she was meant to find him here, at a ceremony about remembering the past and building a better future. The Earth Defense Force Academy was an impressive place. Tall buildings of steel and glass stretched toward the sky, and students from many species walked between them. Lyra stood at the entrance, checking her appearance one last time in her data pad's reflection. The academy had accepted her request to give a guest lecture, and today was the day. "Dr. Lyra." A young human cadet approached her. "I'm here to escort you to the lecture hall." As they walked, Lyra saw training exercises happening on the grounds. Human instructors were teaching both humans and aliens how to work together. She smiled, seeing how much had changed since the war. Now, instead of fighting separately, species were learning to combine their strengths. The lecture hall was large, with seats arranged in rising tiers. Students were already filing in, mostly humans, but also some aliens. Lyra set up her presentation, her hands shaking slightly as she kept glancing at the door, watching for Lieutenant Chen. Then she saw him enter quietly and take a seat at the back of the hall. He looked different in his instructor's uniform than he had at the memorial ceremony. More relaxed, but still alert. The scar on his face caught the light as he sat down. Lyra took a deep breath and began her lecture. "Today, I want to talk about how the relationship between humans and Silurians changed because of one day. The day of the Sci-Fi raid." She shared stories from her research, explaining how human actions during that rescue had changed how her people viewed Earth. As she spoke, she noticed Lieutenant Chen paying close attention, especially when she mentioned the soldiers who had broken protocol to save civilians. "What made that day special," she continued, "wasn't just the number of lives saved. It was how they were saved. Human soldiers showed that they could be both warriors and protectors. They proved that true strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to stop fighting to help others." During the question and answer session, a student raised their hand. "Dr. Lyra, were you there during the raid? Did you see these events yourself?" Lyra's 4 eyes met Lieutenant Chen's for a moment before she answered. "Yes, I was there. I was one of the children who was saved that day. A human soldier carried me to safety through the burning school building, even though he wasn't supposed to leave his post." She saw Lieutenant Chen sit up straighter, a look of recognition starting to cross his face. "That soldier," she continued, her voice getting softer, "taught me something important about humans. He showed me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting the enemy. It's risking everything to help someone you don't even know." After the lecture, students crowded around to ask more questions. Lyra answered them all patiently, but she kept watching Lieutenant Chen. He stayed in his seat, waiting until the others had left. Finally, they were alone in the hall. He walked down to the front, moving slowly, studying her face. "You were carrying a data pad," he said quietly. "You wouldn't let go of it, even when I was carrying you." Lyra's heart beat faster. "You remember?" "I didn't, not at first. But listening to you talk about that day." He smiled slightly. "It started coming back. You were so scared, but you were brave too. You didn't cry or panic. You just held onto that data pad and trusted me to get you out." Lyra reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out her old data pad, the same one from that day. "I still have it," she whispered. "It helped me remember your face, your kindness. But I never knew your name." Lieutenant Chen looked at the old data pad, then back at her face. "Marcus," he said softly. "My name is Marcus Chen, and I think we have a lot to talk about." The Earth Defense Force Academy was an impressive place. Tall buildings of steel and glass stretched toward the sky, and students from many species walked between them. Lyra stood at the entrance, checking her appearance one last time in her data pad's reflection. The Academy had accepted her request to give a guest lecture, and today was the day. "Dr. Lyra." A young human cadet approached her. "I'm here to escort you to the lecture hall." As they walked, Lyra saw training exercises happening on the grounds. Human instructors were teaching both humans and aliens how to work together. She smiled, seeing how much had changed since the war. Now, instead of fighting separately, species were learning to combine their strengths. The lecture hall was large, with seats arranged in rising tiers. Students were already filing in, mostly humans, but also some aliens. Lyra set up her presentation, her hands shaking slightly as she kept glancing at the door, watching for Lieutenant Chen. Then she saw him enter quietly and take a seat at the back of the hall. He looked different in his instructor's uniform than he had at the memorial ceremony. More relaxed, but still alert. The scar on his face caught the light as he sat down. Lyra took a deep breath and began her lecture. "Today, I want to talk about how the relationship between humans and Silurians changed because of one day, the day of the Sila-3 raid." She shared stories from her research, explaining how human actions during that rescue had changed how her people viewed Earth. As she spoke, she noticed Lieutenant Chen paying close attention, especially when she mentioned the soldiers who had broken protocol to save civilians. "What made that day special," she continued, "wasn't just the number of lives saved. It was how they were saved. Human soldiers showed that they could be both warriors and protectors. They proved that true strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to stop fighting to help others." During the question and answer session, a student raised their hand. "Dr. Lyra, were you there during the raid? Did you see these events yourself?" Lyra's 4 eyes met Lieutenant Chen's for a moment before she answered. "Yes, I was there. I was one of the children who was saved that day. A human soldier carried me to safety through the burning school building, even though he wasn't supposed to leave his post." She saw Lieutenant Chen sit up straighter, a look of recognition starting to cross his face. "That soldier," she continued, her voice getting softer, "taught me something important about humans. He showed me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting the enemy. It's risking everything to help someone you don't even know." After the lecture, students crowded around to ask more questions. Lyra answered them all patiently, but she kept watching Lieutenant Chen. He stayed in his seat, waiting until the others had left. Finally, they were alone in the hall. He walked down to the front, moving slowly, studying her face. "You were carrying a data pad," he said quietly. "You wouldn't let go of it, even when I was carrying you." Lyra's heart beat faster. You remember. I didn't, not at first. But listening to you talk about that day. He smiled slightly. It started coming back. You were so scared, but you were brave too. You didn't cry or panic. You just held onto that data pad and trusted me to get you out. Lyra reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out her old data pad, the same one from that day. I still have it, she whispered. It helped me remember your face, your kindness. But I never knew your name. Lieutenant Chen looked at the old data pad, then back at her face. Marcus, he said softly. My name is Marcus Chen, and I think we have a lot to talk about. The emergency alarms at the academy blared without warning. Lyra and Marcus were in his office, discussing her latest research paper, when the screens lit up with urgent messages. The Dreknids had returned, and this time they were heading straight for Earth. It's happening again, Lyra whispered, her silver skin paling with fear. The memories of her childhood came rushing back. Marcus was already moving, his old soldier's instincts taking over. But this time, we're better prepared, and we're not alone. He looked at Lyra. Your research on Dreknid psychology. We need it now. They rushed to the Academy's command center. The large room was filled with officers from different species, all working together. On the main screen, they could see the Dreknid fleet approaching Earth's outer defense line. Dr. Lyra, the Admiral called out when he saw her. Lieutenant Chen says you understand how Dreknids think. We need that knowledge. Lyra stepped forward, pushing aside her fear. Dreknids always attack the same way they did at Sila 3. They think it makes them strong, but that's actually their weakness. They can't adapt or change. She brought up her research on the main screen. Look at their attack pattern. It's exactly the same as 10 years ago. They expect us to react like we did then, with separate species fighting separately. But we're different now. We fight together. Marcus nodded, understanding. The Sila 3 protocol. We learned to combine different species' strengths. That's something the Dreknids never understood. The Admiral looked interested. Go on. Lyra's 4 eyes shone with determination. The Zentarians have the strongest shields. The Meeplans have the fastest ships. Humans have the best battle tactics. And my people, the Silurians, we understand patterns better than anyone. If we work together, we can turn their own strategy against them. Marcus finished. He turned to the Admiral. Sir, with your permission, I'd like Dr. Lyra to help coordinate our defense plan. The next few hours were intense. Lyra worked with military strategists from every allied species. She showed them how to predict Dreknid movements based on their rigid thinking. Marcus helped translate her academic knowledge into military tactics. They'll expect us to defend Earth the way each species defends their own worlds, Lyra explained to the command staff. Instead, we'll use methods they've never seen before. The plan worked better than anyone expected. Zentarian shields protected human ships while they launched attacks. Meekton speed combined with Silurian precision let them target weak points in the Dreknid fleet. The Dreknids, unable to understand or adapt to this new way of fighting, fell into confusion. From the command center, Lyra watched as the Allied fleet drove the Dreknids back. Marcus stood beside her, both of them thinking about how far they had come from that day at Sila 3. You see, Marcus said softly, this is why I saved you that day. Not just because it was right, but because every life has potential. Look what you've done. You've helped save Earth. Lyra touched his arm gently. We did it together. Just like you taught me, strength isn't just about fighting. It's about protecting others and working together. As the last Dreknid ships retreated, cheers filled the command center. Species that had once barely trusted each other were celebrating together. The Admiral approached them, smiling. Dr. Lyra, Lieutenant Chen, he said, the Academy needs teachers who understand what you both showed us today, that our greatest strength comes from working together. Would you consider running a joint program on interspecies cooperation? Lyra looked at Marcus, who nodded. Together, they had come full circle. Once, he had saved her from the Drecknids. Now they had worked together to save others. And soon, they would teach new generations to do the same. 1 year later, Lyra stood at the podium in the Academy's main hall. The room was filled with new cadets from dozens of different species. On her desk sat her old data pad, now a reminder of how far she had come. In the front row, Marcus Chen smiled encouragingly. "Welcome to the first day of interspecies cooperation and protection," she began. "I want to tell you a story about how one act of kindness changed not just my life, but the way our species work together." The students listened intently as she spoke about the raid on Sila 3, about the human soldier who saved her, and about their reunion years later. But most importantly, she told them about what happened after. Last year, when the Drecknids attacked Earth, they expected to find divided species fighting separately. Instead, they found something they couldn't understand: all of us working together. That's why they failed. Marcus stood up and joined her at the podium. "Dr. Lyra and I are living proof of what can happen when we look past our differences," he said. 10 years ago, I was just a soldier who couldn't leave a child behind. She was just a scared girl holding a data pad. Now look at us." Lyra nodded. "Now we teach the Sila 3 protocol to students from every corner of the galaxy. But it's more than just a military strategy. It's a way of thinking." A young Zentarian cadet raised their hand. "Is it true that you still have the same data pad from that day?" Lyra picked up her old data pad, smiling. "Yes, it reminds me that sometimes the smallest things we save can lead to the biggest changes." She showed them how the Academy had changed. The training grounds now had obstacle courses designed for different species to work together. The library had sections where students could learn about each other's cultures. Even the cafeteria served foods from all allied worlds. But the most important change, Marcus added, is in how we think about strength. It's not just about who has the strongest weapons or the best defenses. Real strength comes from understanding each other and working together. After the lecture, they walked through the Academy gardens where they had first really talked a year ago. The paths were now lined with plants from different worlds, growing together in harmony. "Remember when I was just trying to find you to say thank you?" Lyra asked, her silver skin glowing in the sunset. Marcus touched the old scar on his face. "And now look what that search led to. We're teaching the next generation how to be both strong and kind." They stopped at a new memorial that had been built in the garden. It showed holographic images of different species working together during the Earth defense. Zentarian shields protecting Nipton ships, human soldiers carrying alien children to safety, Silarian scientists working with Earth's military. "Your old commanding officer visited last week," Lyra said. "The one who wanted to court-martial you for saving me. Know what he said?" "What?" "He said breaking the rules that day at Sila 3 turned out to be the best order you never followed." She laughed softly. "Because it taught everyone that sometimes compassion is more important than protocol." As new students walked past them, heading to their classes, Lyra and Marcus watched with pride. Each young cadet wore a patch showing all the allied species symbols together, a sign of how much had changed. "One act of kindness," Marcus said quietly. "That's all it takes sometimes." Lyra touched her old data pad. "And one person willing to remember that kindness and build on it." Together, they watched the sun set over the Academy, knowing that their story would continue through every student they taught, every life they touched, and every bridge they built between species. What had started as a rescue during war had become a legacy of peace, understanding, and cooperation that would last for generations to come.